Good evening. Welcome to the September 19, 2022 Troy City Council meeting. Please rise for the invocation and remain standing for our Pledge of Allegiance. Father, we give you thanks for this day and the blessings you've given the city of Troy and its residents. We ask that you continue to bless each and every one of us and be with us tonight as we work through the business of the city at this council table and throughout the entire city, keeping our residents safe. Be with our first responders, always reminding our city that they are the ones that do keep us safe and are there for us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Lord, please be with those who are in need and may not be able to ask for your help, and guide us as always. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our September 19th, 2022 City Council meeting is officially called to order, and I'll ask for the roll call from Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham?
Here.
Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt? Here. Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
All present this evening. First up are certificates of recognition and special presentations. We have one this evening. C1 is a proclamation celebrating Cornerstone Community Financial Credit Union for their partnership with Children's Hospital of Michigan. I'll ask Heidi Kassab, the president and CEO, and Juliana Blankenship, the senior marketing specialist, to join me at the podium so I can present the proclamation and read it into the record. Maybe just Heidi's coming.
Oh.
Sure you don't want to come up, Juliana? I'm good.
She's the spirit behind it.
We're gonna come around this side.
Okay.
I'm going to present the proclamation first, and then I'll let you have an opportunity to speak, of course. The Squishmallows are down in the front row. I hope everybody can see them. And Gigi was mayor for a day,
Yes.
so I don't know if you saw that. But all right, so this is a proclamation celebrating Cornerstone Community Financial Credit Union for their partnership with Children's Hospital of Michigan. Whereas cancer claims the lives of more children than all other childhood diseases combined, worldwide, a child is diagnosed with cancer every 3 minutes. And whereas Cornerstone Community Financial Credit Union, CCFCU, began partnering with Children's Hospital of Michigan for Pediatric Cancer Awareness Month in 2016. Each September, and the CCFCU team connects with the team at Children's Hospital to evaluate their needs and to see how they can help. In the past 3 years, Cornerstone has also included Toledo's ProMedica Children's Hospital, since they have 2 branches in Northern Ohio. And whereas Teddy Bear Drives started in 2016, and they collected and donated approximately 6,000 bears and $10,000 to pediatric cancer research over the next 3 years. In 2019, they started Cruisin' for a Cause because the hospital was part of a pilot program allowing kids to drive themselves into surgery or use ride-on cars to transform rooms. Cornerstone donated a total of 21 remote control ride-on cars. 1 car has the Troy Fire Department patches on, and 1 car has the Troy Police Department patches, split between the Children's Hospital of Michigan, Children's Hospital of Michigan Rehab Center, and the Toledo Children's Hospital, plus $6,000. And whereas in 2020, the CCFCU team decided to, quote, build hope and collect 500 brand new Lego sets for the hospitals. Legos are easy to disinfect, and children use them to build, imagine, dream, and play. The team, along with their community members, donated 800 brand new Lego sets to the hospitals. And whereas, quote, Creating Courage was the 2021 program, the Cornerstone team collected and donated 1,000 creative items like crayons, craft kits, creative toys, journals, coloring books, and more to the hospitals. September 2022, the goal of Squish Out Cancer is to collect and donate 1,000 Squishmallows, 500 to each hospital. And whereas the community and CCFCU members have come together since 2016 and are always so generous during the drives for the hospitals, CCFCU matches each donation, so 1 donation always becomes 2. The team members have fun each year coming up with creative ways to fill the toy closets at the hospitals and bring awareness to pediatric cancer. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Mayor and City Council of the City of Troy hereby applaud and sincerely thank President and CEO Heidi Kassab and the Cornerstone Community Financial Credit Union team for partnering with Children's Hospital of Michigan for Pediatric Cancer Awareness Month since 2016. And be it further resolved that the mayor and city council of the city of Troy invite all residents to recognize, celebrate, and also support the generosity and dedication of the Cornerstone Community Financial Credit Union team members, true heroes in our Troy community and beyond. Heidi, this proclamation is presented this 19th day of September 2022, and it's signed by myself as the mayor, and all members of our city council have signed it. I present it to you, and I thank you so much for all the work you've done.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Mayor Baker and City Council members. I'm pleased to accept this commendation on behalf of Cornerstone Community Financial. We've been proud residents of Troy for over a decade, and when it came time to select our new operations center, there was no better place that we wanted to be, which was Troy. So in 2023, we are moving to a much larger, about 19,000 square foot location on Big Beaver, so we can continue working for this dynamic and energetic community. It's been a wonderful home for us and members and our employees. And I thank you everyone who donated to the Squishmallows. It's a wonderful cause. It does definitely bring some hope to these children who are in the cancer ward at all of the local hospitals, especially Children's Hospital in Michigan. Something we've done for many years, and each year it becomes more and more prevalent why we need to keep doing this. And the city of Troy has been one of our biggest supporters, and we can't thank you enough. So your kindness is a reflection of the city's generosity. It really does show the giving spirit of the city. So we can't wait to deliver all the Squishmallows. You can see they're in participation today, and you're right, one of them was an honorary, I think, mayor of Troy for a little bit. And our fellow friends at the Children's Hospital do thank you also. So thank you very much.
That concludes certificates of recognition and special presentations. We thank you, Heidi and Cornerstone, for all the good work you're doing for our community, especially for children. We really do appreciate it. There are no carryover items this evening, so we move on to public hearings. We have one this evening. E1 is a conditional rezoning, CRJPLN 2022-001, proposed homestead condominiums, east side of Livernois, north of Big Beaver, PIN number 88-20-001, 007-008-009, Section 22 from R1E, one family residential district, to RT, one family attached residential district. I see that Community Development Director Brent Savedon has come forward for the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Baker, City Council. It's been a while. Nice to see you all again. Thank you for the introduction, Mayor Baker. As I like to do when we bring items forward to City Council is a quick primer on exactly what this process is that we're involved with this evening. So this is a conditional rezoning. I think all of the City Council has been involved with reviewing a conditional rezoning application. And what is a conditional rezoning? It is a zoning district map amendment or a rezoning that involves the applicant voluntarily offering conditions of approval as part of the rezoning application, and it's done in order to protect adjacent properties from the potential negative impacts of the rezoning. And I can't stress enough that this is not a negotiation. Conditions have to be voluntarily offered by the applicant. They can include a wide range of different elements. They can include use restriction, hours of operation, or in this case, a complete site plan application. So, and I'll get to that in a few slides here, but the applicant has voluntarily submitted a complete package for a preliminary site plan. There's a lot of different benefits to the conditional rezoning process. Prior to state law changing and permitting conditional rezonings around 15 to 20 years ago, conditional rezonings were illegal. They're also known as contract zonings, and applicants were not allowed to enter into these types of relationships with city councils. And that was a problem because, as you're all aware, when it's a simple rezoning, once the property is rezoned, any of the uses permitted under that zoning district are permitted, provided you go through the process. But there could be a whole wide range of uses that the neighbors don't want and they're afraid of, rightfully so, but the developer doesn't want to develop them. So the conditional rezonings provide predictability. In this case, again, it's a complete site plan, so neighbors who are potentially affected by the rezoning know exactly what's being voluntarily offered. It gives an opportunity for the residents to be heard during the rezoning process, and there's a greater chance of a win-win. I often describe zoning as a balance of property rights, and the conditional rezoning process allows for a greater chance of that balance. So in terms of background, the site is approximately 9.5 acres in area. It's comprised of 3 different parcels, and it's zoned R1E 1 family residential, which is our densest single-family residential zoning district. There's a real mix of uses and zoning districts in this area, as you can see from this map. To the north, the zoning is PUD, planned unit development. To the west, across Livernois, it's community facility and Big Beaver. And to the south and to the east, it's zoned single-family residential R1E. And the land uses are a mix as well. To the north is an assisted living facility. Across Livernois is a community center and a park. And to the south and to the east are single-family residential neighborhoods. The applicant seeks rezoning to RT, 1 family attached residential. You can see by the site is here, and the nearest RT zoning districts are here, 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 and here, approximately a mile or so away from this site. Let's talk about natural features. There's a lot of them on this site. There's floodplain, there's wetlands, there's tree cover, and the lane drain runs along the southern portion of the property. I should note that all proposed buildings are proposed to be constructed outside of the floodplain and the wetlands. So let's talk about wetlands and floodplain. The wetland area is up here in the northeast portion of the property. It's state of Michigan wetlands. It's not proposed to really be touched, but a lot of the site you see here is floodplain as well. The solid red line is the line that is presently on record with FEMA, and the dotted line is the floodplain line that's been delineated by the applicant. They did a topographic survey and identified the elevation that they believed was the actual floodplain line. That will be reviewed by a number of different entities to verify it during final engineering review. If this is approved, it'll be reviewed by the city engineering department, the city's engineering consultant, Oakland County, the state of Michigan, and FEMA. So there's a lot of racetrack ahead if this moves forward during a preliminary site plan review. And the applicant is proposing a floodplain map amendment as part of this process based on that topographic survey. And they're proposing cutting and filling on the property. So what is cut and fill? So full disclosure, I'm not a civil engineer. I know enough to stand up here and provide a very, very rudimentary description, but there is an expert in the room behind me. Scott Finley, the deputy city engineer, is here. He's an expert on this, so if you have any questions about floodplains, he can certainly answer them. So floodplain, what is floodplain? It's basically storage of stormwater on a property, and it can be changed on a property, provided that the storage capacity of a floodplain does not decrease when it's changed. So how do you change it? Well, you cut in one area and you fill in another area. So what they're proposing is doing significant cutting from here and filling over here on the buildable side of the property. And this red line delineates the limits of the floodplain fill area. The The cutting and the filling cannot impact the floodplain elevation upstream or downstream. It can't be changed more than 1/10 of an inch. So it's got to be really, really minimal disturbance of the floodplain. And that exhausts my knowledge of floodplains. So let's talk about trees. There's a lot of trees on this site. Many of the trees are invasive. This is very common in Troy, where there was a lot of land that was farmed at one time. The farming stopped. The fields were taken over with invasive tree species, so this is no exception. There's a lot of invasive trees like cottonwoods and black walnuts, et cetera. But there's a lot of trees on the site. 800 trees is nothing to sneeze at, and they do provide value even though they're invasive. They still provide shade and habitat, et cetera. So there's a lot of value to trees, even though not of high quality. The applicant's proposing to take down 402 trees, but save 407 trees, which is pretty significant. There are only 57 trees of quality as defined by the zoning ordinance, and 49 of those are to be taken down. 8 trees of those quality trees are to be preserved. But the applicant's proposing a significant amount of new trees, which our ordinance defines as more quality trees on the site. There's a lot of trees proposed along the northern property line. This is, again, assisted living. So these trees are here as much to screen the assisted living facility from the new development as they are to do the opposite. But really what I think we care the most about is how it looks from Livernois, and they're proposing landscape berms along Livernois. But really what's most important is how is this going to affect single-family residential to the south and to the east? And they're proposing to keep a lot of trees here along the southern property line, as long as add a significant number of trees, tree plantings along the southern boundary, as well as trees in the street, as well as throughout the park here, new trees to improve this amenity. And I would note that Jim Epping, who is a landscape architect, is here on behalf of the applicant, and he can talk about trees and he can talk about some of these elements of the site. So the applicant's proposing 30 units in 6 buildings. That represents 3.14 units per acre if you look at the whole property. They are proposing a private road, a detention basin, which is typical, community park, and again, preserving wetlands in the northeast corner of the development. Each unit has a 2-car garage. There's not a dedicated area of guest parking provided. This is typical to single-family subdivisions or site condominiums where they, generally speaking, don't provide a dedicated off-street parking area. They park, as I indicated, in the garage, in front of the garage, and on the street where it's permitted. So it's similar in design to abutting neighborhoods. And the application does meet all RT zoning district requirements, specifically area height, setbacks, and other provisions. So they are proposing a community park with landscaping, benches, trails, butterfly garden, exercise stations. There is a public trailway easement proposed over the asphalt path on the site. I've delineated it in orange, and that goes all the way out. This asphalt path goes all the way out to Livernois and connects to Livernois. Now, they're not proposing to make any improvements here at this time because it's a path to nowhere. But they're providing a easement within the wetlands area, which provides for the opportunity in the future to extend this asphalt trail through the wetlands. And if we can get an easement from the owner to the north, which we have not got yet, if we can get an easement, then we can bring it further to the north and connect to the existing trailway that's located to the north. So it's an opportunity to extend that park from where it is now, just east of the dog park, all the way to Livernois. So it's kind of a potentially exciting project in terms of walkability and trailways. So again, as indicated, the site plan is a condition of approval, conforms with RT, and this is important. Neighbors are always concerned about height, and I totally understand that. The maximum height in this district is 30 feet, which is the same maximum height of R1E. So they're not going to be any taller than what's permitted to the south. In terms of traffic, we had our traffic Consultant OHM prepare a traffic memo. The traffic generated by 30 units is really minimal, given the fact that there's 20,000 vehicles a day on Livernois, and that the afternoon peak is 1,600 cars. In terms of the afternoon peak, this is only going to generate 14 trips into the development. So it's really negligible in terms of its impact on Livernois, and it will not be perceptible to the majority of the users. And it does not connect to any abutting residential neighborhoods. The applicant is proposing a different type of building than we're used to seeing. Two types of units. This is the ranch with lifestyle space. Of the 30 total units, 12 are proposed to look like this, and all of them have first floor master bedrooms. So they're the empty nester type of development that we hear a lot of people talk about. And the size of these ranges from 1,735 to 1,840 square feet. The other product is referred to as single level living units. There are 18 total, and of the 18, 9 have first floor master bedrooms, and they range from 1,317 to 1,488 square feet. So these are these smaller type units with first floor masters. And what's my math here? 12 plus 9, 21 units of the 30 will be the first floor master, relatively small in size. That empty nester type market. We've got materials are included in the packet, proposing quality materials, brick, hardy plank siding, dimensional shingles for the roof, and accent roofs that are comprised of metal roofs. So they're gonna look really nice, and it'll be of quality materials. I was asked by a member of City Council to address one of the comments that was provided by a resident. Doesn't matter which resident, all comments are important. This resident sent in a comment stating that it was this resident's opinion that the development, violated the City of Troy master plan. And the rationale in the comment was, as the Troy City master plan described, and this is taken right from the comment, Troy residents want fewer multifamily buildings and more green spaces, fewer townhomes, more trees. Moderation's proposal is to cut down a majority of the forest to build 6 two-story buildings with 30 units. This is a huge violation of the Troy master plan. And I'm glad this was shared with me. I think it's important to talk about this because the survey that's referred to here, the Troy master plan survey, is top of mind for a lot of residents. So let's talk about the survey. So as you're aware, Mayor Baker and City Council, we're in the process of amending our master plan. And as part of, we wanted to do some significant community engagement and community outreach for soliciting input for the master plan amendment process. So we conducted a master plan survey in the summer of 2021, and we got 1,653 responses, which is a good number. I'm not a mathematician. It's probably not mathematically significant for a city of 87,000 people, but that doesn't really matter. What this is provides an indication of what a lot of the residents are thinking and feeling regarding Troy. So this data is lifted directly from the survey. This is raw data results, and I'm going to go over 5 or 6 of these questions because they address the concern of the resident. So this is the first question. There was a bunch of questions asked about neighborhood nodes. As you're aware, neighborhood nodes is a focus of the master plan. This is the first non-node question that relates to land use. So the question is, does Troy have enough open or green space? 47% said yes, there is enough open or green space, but additional green space would be welcome. 39% said nope, there's not enough open or green space. And 13% said, yeah, there's enough green space. So this number, 47% would welcoming more, and 39% saying there's not enough. That's pretty significant. I would argue that people want more green space, pretty clear. Next question, should Troy do more to proactively preserve open and green space? 59%, yes, by purchasing property to preserve as open and green space. That's pretty significant amount of people who are willing to put their money where their mouth is and pay for preservation. 33% said yes by setting aside open space as part of new development, which this development, as you know, we just went over it, proposes to maintain a significant portion of the site as open space. Next question, What kind of new residential development is missing in Troy? The number one answer, 46%, empty nesters, ranch or home with first floor masters. This is 21 of 30 units is proposing empty nester homes. 30% said none, we're fine, no more, enough. But if you look down, way down, 6% said townhomes. So not a very popular housing type. Next question, are there any kinds of development that occur too frequently in Troy? Number one answer, 45%, townhomes. They don't want more townhomes. Apartments is number two, 36%. And then it goes down. But 1% said, 1% said empty nester homes. So 1% thought there was too many empty nester homes. What's the biggest asset of your neighborhood? Schools, that's 63%. That's a no-brainer. We know how amazing the school district is. A lot of people move here in part because of schools. Let's start talking about some of the other issues, some of the other things here. Mature trees, 60%. Walkable sidewalks, 59%. Quality housing, 51%. Access to parks, 41%. Bikeable, 32%. Access to open space, 32%. These are all elements that are proposed as part of this development. Next question, what's the biggest threat to the viability of your neighborhood? 41% new development, 38% traffic, 33% lack of green space. So I think some pretty telling numbers, and I think it's nice to revisit this. We put a lot of effort into the survey, so it's nice to look at some of the results. But that's one community engagement tool of a toolbox of many that we applied for the master plan, including the neighborhood node walk and talks with Planning Commission, the site visits with City Council, the subcommittee meetings, many public meetings, and we're going to have some public hearings upcoming. That's one tool, and that has not been adopted as policy. So it's important information. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. I'm glad the resident brought it up, but it's not that survey has not been adopted as policy. So, but it's still great information. So let's talk about the master plan that we have now. That is policy. The area is right here, and the classification is single-family residential. And the description is right. This is lifted right out of the master plan. It's the social units of the city. They are walkable, safe spaces to live. They're centered on schools or other community facilities, and they're linked with nearby services. Now, we talked about where the nearest RT was. It's not adjacent to this site, and it is more intense than, and RT is more intense than single-family residential. But RT is also consistent with some of the existing land uses of the parcels that are located to the north, the senior assisted living facility, and to the west, the apartment building is just across the street from the community center. So it's a mixed bag here. It's an interesting site, and a question for you to consider that we'll get to in a further slide. Has the developer proposed the development that's single-family residential in character and compatible with adjacent neighborhoods? Something to think about, because we'll get to that in one of the standards that you're going to be looking at. So the Planning Commission held a public hearing on this item, July 26, 2022. There was I forget the number of residents that spoke. There was quite a few that spoke. Their comments are reflected in the minutes. There was also some residents who submitted written comments. Those are in your packet as well. But at the end of the day, Planning Commission recommended approval 7-1 for this application. There are some really minor revisions that were made to the packet since July 26th. Originally, this was a sidewalk along the northern part of the road, and this was a 6-foot wide gravel path. That gravel path has been widened to 8 feet wide, and there's now and this goes all the way out. The gravel path used to terminate around here, and this became sidewalk. Now they're proposing an asphalt path, as they indicated, to potentially connect all the way to the north to the Trailway. And they have provided an easement, a public pathway easement, and they've also provided, as I indicated earlier, an easement through the wetlands. So pretty somewhat insignificant changes. So standards, we're getting towards the end. I apologize for how many slides, but I thought it was important to really vet this. The standards for conditional rezoning in section 16.04C3, I'll just go over them really quickly. There's 5 conditions. Proposed development and or proposed use are designed for public health, safety, and welfare purposes. 2, the conditions, proposed development and or proposed use are not in material conflict with the master plan. 3, the conditions, proposed development and or proposed use are in accordance with all terms and provisions of the zoning district, and they have met the requirements of the RT district. 4, public services and facilities affected by proposed development will be capable of accommodating service and facility loads caused by use of the development, and there's no indication that that is the case. So it appears to meet this standard. And finally, the conditions, proposed development and or proposed use shall ensure compatibility with adjacent uses of land. And with that presentation, I now welcome any questions you may have.
I am Councilmember Hoderick needs a quick break. She's choking on some dust. I don't usually do this in the middle of the presentation, but we're going to recess for just 2 minutes,
no
okay? And then we'll come back with questions. We'll go back on the record here. And now's an opportunity for questions for Mr. Savanon. Questions? Councilmember Chamberlain-Crango.
Thank you, Mayor. So with regards to some of the changes from the initial version sent to the Planning Commission, I know there's this easement that's been provided to the city regarding the wetlands portion of that trail. So that easement is only for that part of the trail that goes through the woods, essentially, the wetlands. It does not, the easement does not relate to the trails that are through that park or the park itself.
The easement would go, all of the trails located on the subject site would be within that easement.
All of them?
Yes.
Okay. So
all the asphalt trails.
That entire space of the park?
Yes. So it would be a public pathway.
Okay. And a reminder, is the applicant paying for that trail or is the city?
The applicant would, I believe the applicant's going to pay for the trail portion inside this site, on this site.
Because I know around the park area, but as well as the adjoining part to the Troy trails.
Right.
You're also paying for that.
On the site.
On the site, yes, yes. Last question around, almost last question, screening and buffering. So if I were looking down Troy Avenue or Frankton, whether from Big Beaver or closer up, what would I see with this development? And what I'm trying to get at is, I'm still trying to understand how thick those trees are as sort of a screening. I know that a good number of them are going to be left there, but I'm just trying to get a sense in my mind as how thick that is, and what people would see if you're looking down those streets.
So of the 407 trees that are saved, they're either don't like to, I've got my own pointer here, I got to juggle.
I mean, Lewis and,
Yeah, so of the 407 trees, they're preserving them here and along the north side of the drain, okay? As well as adding additional trees here. They're different species. There's white pine, there's spruce, there's crab, apple, there's a whole it's a variety of trees. So you're talking about this view shed here?
right, exactly, yeah, Lewis and Troy.
Yeah, it's,
'Cause right now you see forest when you look, so I drove down all those
Right.
ends. You know, it's for, of course, because there's also forest behind, the initial forest by the main drain. But just wondering with the development, are you going to see the development? Like how thick is that as a screening mechanism? Or are folks going to see the, those buildings?
I'm looking at the site plan that actually shows the trees that are remaining on site. I would say it's fairly thick. There's within this width of right-of-way here. So this view shed here, straight north, there appears to be about 5 trees that are to be preserved. Over here, there's 7 or 8 trees to be preserved. And then for Frankton, there's maybe 4 or 5 trees, but there's no residences up there.
I know there was also questions about kind of screening or buffering of noise as well with the trails for residents there. Other questions around height. I'm not good at guesstimating height, maybe my colleagues are, is just what, I know that the buildings themselves, those are 30 feet. The trees that exist, I know some will be taken down, some will be left. How much of that development can you see above those trees, I'm wondering?
I think there may be some merit in, their landscape architect, Jim Epping, is here, and he's going to be very familiar with the plantings, the height of the plantings at time of planting, as well as the expectation for what can we expect in terms of growth moving forward. I think there'd be some value there in bringing him up to accurately answer your question.
Okay, that's helpful. Just last question, can you remind me, R1E, what are the size of those lots in a traditional R1E, not the RT that we're considering?
7,500 square foot, 60 feet wide. They're our smallest lot, so approximately 5 point something units per acre. That's a theoretical maximum based on the square footage. It doesn't include roads and whatnot, so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Hamilton?
Thanks, Mayor. A lot of residents that spoke at planning and that wrote in were concerned about water. And I know that's always a concern about a lot of these developments, especially when they're near drains. Can you or city staff speak on what will be done to make sure that this development doesn't either make the water situation worse or could even potentially make it better?
Well, I can give you my my take as a planner, but not a civil engineer. And again, Scott Finley is here. If this application were to be granted preliminary site plan approval, it would trigger final site plan approval. And by law, the development could not negatively impact abutting properties in terms of runoff and drainage and things like that. So it would be designed by a civil engineer licensed in the state of Michigan, reviewed by, again, I mentioned it earlier, reviewed by our engineering department, our engineering consultant because it involves the drain, Oakland County, state of Michigan, and FEMA. So there's a lot of eyeballs on this. Right now, the site, there's minimal development on the site. Again, they're proposing 30 units and road and more impervious surface, but they're also required to provide stormwater detention here, and there's no stormwater detention on the site now, so that's going to be able to store a significant amount of rainwater during a rain event, and more importantly, it's going to be able to meter that out. So instead of, we get a couple nights ago, we had a really torrential downpour. We had a lot of rain in a short period of time. That hits the ground and it's immediately in the drain, and it happened. That drain can rise really quickly. With stormwater detention, it's able to capture a lot of that rainwater, hold it, slow it down, cool it, and meter it out over time, so it's less impactful. So in some respects, there could actually be a benefit to the neighbors downstream as well as upstream for development. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but only addressing stormwater, I think it makes a lot of sense. But again, Scott Finley is a lot more knowledgeable than I am on this matter.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Do we expect that stormwater detention pond to actually be a pond, or is it expected to be dry until a rain event? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Wet.
I think I saw that.
I have so many projects in my mind, Mr. Mayor, that I get them confused whether it's wet or dry. Wet. It'll be a wet pond.
Okay. Sorry, since we were talking about it. Additional questions. Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple quick questions. I wanted to touch upon what Councilmember Rebecca Kringa was saying, Chamberlain Kringa. The easement that goes to the north, now that has to go through the senior living facility, correct?
Yes.
And so we don't necessarily have their approval as of now.
Correct.
To be able to connect it to the dog park.
It's a wish list.
Okay, so we're just, that's just kind of, we're hoping that.
We're hoping, based on the fact that we although it was I believe the property has been sold since the time it was developed. It's got a different owner now, but we entered into a partnership on that development that assisted us in developing the dog park and developing the Trailway system. So there's some history, at least with the development. So we're being optimistic that we can move forward with this.
And then some other questions about the trees, and maybe somebody else can better answer it. So there are 800 trees. We're basically removing about half of them that we have to do because of the cut and fill, is my understanding, predominantly. And then they're going to propose planting more trees. Do we know about how many trees they are proposing to replant?
Yeah, there's a formula in the report that indicates how many they're required to plant. I forget exactly how many inches. I want to say it was 132 inches, I want to say. They're significantly exceeding what they're required to replant. Because the quality of trees is relatively poor, again, there's value in trees, but based on our standards under our woodland protection ordinance, they're only required to replace a certain percentage, but they're dramatically going over that, what they're required to plant.
And then another quick question about the lease community. So they will maintain ownership of this property then, and individuals will lease out these homes, is the understanding, or?
I think you're better off to ask the petitioner, Joe Maniaci from Mondrian. My understanding is that initially they're going to be leased, but the applicant reserves the right to sell units in the future.
Okay.
But Mr. Maniaci is here this evening. He can answer in more detail.
And one last question, if possible. So my understanding is the front portion is private, right? The area around the homes is private, but this is public in the back area, correct? Like the trails are more public, open to the public?
There will be an easement. The trails, the asphalt trails will be constructed within an easement, a public trailway easement that will provide access to the public, but the park itself would be private.
Oh, okay, so it's still part, because I was just wondering about maintenance. So the maintenance would be up to the private owner then of the property? It wouldn't be the city's
Yes.
to maintain the trails? Okay, correct?
Yeah. Kurt's giving me a head nod.
Is that a head nod? Yes, it's up to the owner of the property, or yes, it's up to the city? Owner.
The DPW director, who's been involved with the discussions with the applicant in terms of the potential for connecting the trail, et cetera, says it would be the responsibility of the owner.
And just to clarify, it's the easement goes all the way out to Livernois, so those sidewalks in front of the units, theoretically, all of us could walk right through that neighborhood onto those trails, right?
Yeah, the trailway is going to be on the north side of the road.
Right.
So, yeah, not just theoretically, there's going to be an easement that will provide residents with the right to do that.
You good, Teresa?
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Abraham.
Maybe this question is more for Mr. Finley. It's about the stormwater retention. So it sounds like the lane drain has not been, I'll say, properly addressed by the county for a while, which is likely exacerbating the flooding situation. Would the plans to address the stormwater on this property take into account that the lane drain is not necessarily operating at its optimal level or as it's designed?
That's definitely a question for Mr. Finley. I can't touch that one.
Is Mr. Finley prepared to answer those questions, Mark?
I did, let the record show, I did warn Scott before the meeting there was a good chance he's going to be asked questions about this, so.
I think now is as good a time as ever.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Yes, I mean, the lane drain has been maintained such that immediate risks of flooding to neighborhoods and properties are addressed on an annual basis. So the big limbs and tree logs and everything else that fall in there get taken out when they're made aware of it. Have they gone through and re-dredged it and restored it to its 1960s condition? No. I mean, that's something they would do as an SAD, and in turn assess the drainage district at large, and the Troy residents would have to pay for that. They are currently working on cleaning out part of the drain down at Rochester Road and the Sturgis, because the lane and the Sturgis merge halfway from Livernois over to Rochester. And the grates down there tend to collect trash and debris and are causing the majority of that flooding. So they are currently working on a program to eliminate that trash and debris buildup. So it will help in the future. We won't get so many backups once that project's completed. But to your point, do we design it based on its condition today? Only in the fact that we look at where the water level is, and you design to the water level and not to the theoretical bottom of the drain. So there is a little bit of a play in there. But the full flow and capacity of all the cross culverts at the roads kind of restricts it. So you're really designing to that restriction that goes underneath all the roads. The drain itself can handle a lot more capacity, and the floodplain areas are where it backflows to. So the restrictions are the cross culverts under the roads, and they are designing to those.
Thank you.
Okay.
While Mr. Finley's up here, were there any additional questions specifically for him? Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt. Let me come back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. And maybe this is for you, or maybe this is for the applicant. Would the area, the ground immediately along their side of the lane drain, would that be altered in any way? And why I'm asking is I was actually out there this afternoon, and you can see, based on, right now we had like, I think, an inch or so of rain last night or early this morning. And the drain is like, it's not at capacity, but it's pretty high up. It's like only a foot or two below the level on their side, on the applicant's side. My concern is if they were to alter it on any way on their side, then where this less than stellar drain is going to flow is going to be on the side of the homeowners.
Well, that's part of the multi-level review that the Drain Commission, Eagle, and FEMA, and our consultants look at too. But part of the cut fill is you're going to change where they're storing and placing water, the floodplain water, on their site. So they're allowed to do that. Eagle will allow you to fill 300 cubic yards of floodplain. The city requires equal cut and fill. So the developer always has to meet the higher standard as he's going through all the different approval processes. So, yeah, they can change and alter their side, but at the end of the day, it's the elevation upstream and downstream can't change more than that 1/10 of a foot. So they run it through the hydraulic models. They have cross sections and surveyed and data points, and they plug a lot of boxes, check a lot of squares off, and that's what our consultants review, that technical aspect of it. And so, no, at the end of the day, the cross sections on the other side of the drain shouldn't be affected. Their banks over there. They're going to flatten, smooth, and reshape their side over there so that, the amount of floodplain water they had on their site before will be there again. Plus, they're providing detention over and above the floodplain that was already there. So,
And thank you. And then Mr. Savanon had mentioned that by law, they can't do anything on their site that will adversely impact the neighboring sites, such as, water intrusion from their site onto another site. What's the remedy if their best laid plans don't quite go as they want, and somewhere a year or two down the road, we're seeing increased flooding on neighboring properties?
well, that's probably a larger question and a different topic, and then part of it goes to with the county working at cleaning out the facility down at Rochester Road, or looking at cleaning out all the drains altogether. I think last week we presented that grant that we got from the county. We're updating all of our master plans for sanitary and stormwater, and updating that master plan to provide alternatives for these floodplains. I mean, the old plan does call for a 72-inch to come up from Big Beaver up Livernois to intercept the high weather flow. So the 90 inches on Big Beaver, and it's stubbed to the north, and it's been there for 25 years, waiting for the right project and the right funding to come up the lane drain. But there's 100 projects in Troy waiting for the right project and the right funding to relieve drainage issues, so.
Is that your question, Mayor Pro Tem Harrison Galt? Or I misread your question as what would the neighbors, what would the neighbors do if they did have an adverse effect?
What would the city do if the applicant didn't, if their plans did not result in preventing adverse impact to the neighboring properties? Can the city do something about that? Do the neighbors have to hire a lawyer and sue the condominium development? I mean, what happens?
Well, we've analyzed, why isn't it performing as, designed or as thought, and look to correct or mitigate what isn't allowing it to function as what we thought or what was anticipated. I mean, if a culvert has failed or if something's gotten blocked downstream, we would get it cleaned out. But it's going through a lot of levels of review that there shouldn't be anything major. You may get a one-off where some trees fell in the drain and it temporarily blocked something out, and it flooded. Well, whether the development went in or not, if those trees fell and blocked the drain off, it would flood.
City Attorney Bloom leaned forward the minute that question got
Yeah,
finessed. So go ahead, City Attorney Bloom.
Because you did ask, it does have some legal implications here. Obviously, if it's not built according to the specs, or if it's altered subsequently so that it is not consistent with the approved drawings and the approved documents and the approved permit, then the city would have some power of enforcement. Absent that, if it is in compliance, with everything that was approved and all of the, the levels have been satisfied, then it really probably, well, you've heard Mr. Finley talk about what we would do if we had the resources, but ultimately, it also may fall to those property owners.
And then, again, I'm not sure who this question goes to, but we're taking out 400 trees. Some are not great trees and so forth, but trees do soak up water. And in fact, I remember having a arborist tell me cottonwoods are great for soaking up water. So even though they're an invasive tree and not a preferred tree, my concern is does their modeling and their plans take into effect the removal of several hundred trees on the groundwater flow and how that is going, are they looking at that as part of their plan?
Groundwater is what's below surface. Groundwater is never looked at in any storm sewer model.
Surface water is what I meant.
The surface water, yes, I mean, there's different runoff coefficients that are assigned to, grass areas, tree-covered areas, hilly areas, flat areas, paved areas. So, you look at the runoff coefficient that's out there pre-development and with the detention, and then you throw in all the coefficients after development, that's what your detention pond has to hold. It has to hold that change.
Okay.
So
that is taken into consideration.
that's taken into consideration. That pond will be large enough to handle the changes in the runoff coefficients.
Okay.
follow up with that one quick. I think we run into a similar or a consistent question from residents where we're at this preliminary plan versus what happens at final site plan. Would it be possible to hear maybe just a 30-second elevator explanation of what the city does in between approval of the preliminary site plan as it relates to water and flooding or all over to get to the final approval? Because I think residents have valid concerns that if we approve something tonight, even though it's preliminary, they've sent us pictures with water flooding the ends of their streets, and they believe, rightly or wrongly, that additional development's only going to make it worse. So what is the process that the city does? And you mentioned Eagle, you mentioned the county. Who's involved in then making those final determinations? And can you tell us something that would help us talk to our residents and also our residents feel a little more secure in that those issues truly will be addressed prior to construction?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the preliminary approval is just that, it's preliminary. It generally conforms to the zoning. If you build it per the standards, final site plan will be granted. So now they're going through and doing all the detailed. So, I mean, they've done a lot of the detailed survey work. The HEC-RAS programs have been generated. Our consultant is currently reviewing them. I think they've already preliminarily sent plans to the county. They're trying to get the other agencies' thoughts and opinions on what they need to do to finish the final detailing it. And everything has a cost. So they're not going to do the full-fledged engineering until you get a preliminary approval. So, I mean, they're going to dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and we'll send the plan. They have to go to the county. They'll get their county approval. We'll have to get Eagle's approval. And then with those approvals, our consultants approved it, the county's approved it, Eagle's approved it. We'll look at it, we'll concur, we'll send it off to FEMA. They'll approve it. Once they approve it, then the city will give them final approval. So
I appreciate that. To hear all the other agencies that have to touch these plans and look at those water issues prior to the city just approving. I think that's important to consistently state. So I thank you. City Manager Miller.
Just really quick, Mayor and Council. Mr. Finley just talked about one aspect that occurs after preliminary approval. There are others that occur, just so that you know that the preliminary site plan approval, which is part of the conditional rezoning, sets up where the details for construction have to occur, easements, other permits, which then, including what Mr. Finley talked about. Once all of those are completed, then it's presented to the planning department, Mr. Savidat, who then grants final site plan approval.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Finley or questions in general? Go ahead, Councilmember Hoderick.
You mentioned about the Rochester Road, the work that's going on there. Do you have a sense, this is a little outside the scope of this discussion, and yet it's also very much related, right? Because we have residents there that are experiencing issues that I think are impacted by that work that's going on there on Rochester Road to mitigate. Do you have a sense of timing, not to put you on the spot, because I know it's the county's work, right? Do you have any sense of timing on that?
I don't know if Kurt has a better sense of the timing. I want to think that we're 6 months to a year out.
How long does that take them to mitigate that?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So Oakland County Resource Commission is in design right now. So they've hired a consultant to actually start designing the improvements. It's a multifaceted project that's really going to start with removing the sediment underneath Rochester Road and Big Beaver. So that's the first concentration because they believe that's actually what is contributing to the backlog of water flow. So cleaning out the sediment and then once the sediment's cleaned out, look at the hydraulics and design any future improvements. This is a very large pipe. They're actually looking at putting a chamber on top of the pipe to lower a skid steer or a small bucket tractor inside that pipe that they'll divert the water while it's in there cleaning out the sediment. We're probably looking at a year before that's complete. 3 to 4 months for additional design, and then some time to organize the contractors to actually complete the work.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Finley related to this while he's here? You can always come back. But. Councilmember Abraham, I don't know if you had more questions. I cut you off to call up Mr. Finley.
I had one other question, but not about stormwater.
Okay.
So there has been feedback from various residents related to property value and what this development might do to the existing neighborhoods and homes, partly by the nature of the development and partly because some of these properties will be leased or rental units. Is there any data or any estimates of what the property value impact might be?
There are no studies or there's no evidence that I'm aware of that this type of development will have any type of an impact on a single-family residential neighborhood that abuts it. I'm certainly no expert. I try to keep up on any studies that are out there related to planning and zoning. I would have to defer to the assessor on this matter, but I'm not aware of any.
Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, I had something. Over my somewhat long career, this question comes up with many developments, and our assessing professionals have always indicated that it's really a misnomer. I mean, the construction of other homes near other homes doesn't really negatively impact those homes. In fact, many times it's, positive in the sense that their valuation and sales come into the neighborhood. So it's very rare that residential development impacts negatively from an economic standpoint other properties. Very rare.
Thank you. Do you have additional questions, Councilmember Hodrick?
I appreciate Councilwoman Chamberlain-Crango talking about the tree buffer, and apologies for dwelling on what should be easier to understand perhaps, but what you're indicating in this diagram, those trees are in addition to what will be left there, or does that represent what will be there, both what's left and new? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I believe I do. There's a swath here that's to be preserved. And then if you see these dots here, these are additional trees. They're staggered. Mr. Epping can tell you exactly how many feet, but all the way along here, just to the north of that swath of preserved trees are additional trees to provide additional landscaping, additional buffering. And again, they're a mix of species.
And evergreen.
A portion of them are evergreen, yes.
Okay.
Just to clarify, the dark green that looks essentially shaded in, that's what's there now? And then just the only individual trees that are shown on here are what's new?
Yes.
So everything that's in the shaded area,
correct.
That's what it looks like today?
Yes.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
From Livernois, they're affecting that buffer that we heard when we were on our node walks, and we've heard from residents that they like to see that creates a green space feel, even from our main roads, it looks like. So that's pretty thick between Livernois and that.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is these are berms that are landscaped with significant trees and shrubs.
It's going to be berms in addition.
Yes.
And we know what that looks like in other areas of the city. Okay, thank you. Thank you. The other questions, the stormwater is something we take seriously, and we are hearing from residents, so we appreciate the lengthy conversation on helping us understand what's happening.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crango.
Really quick, I just thought of something. So related to property values, I think, Brett, just in a previous meeting, you mentioned the story of lakefront property in Indiana, of how you were touring, I think, Carmel or somewhere. And
great memory.
yes, and you said the mayor or city manager had mentioned that properties that are near trails actually are places where property values are actually going up because people want to be near those amenities. So I just wonder, is that just a story? Is there any articles behind that might suggest, these homes and even the neighbors just to the south that, by having access to those trails, that actually might be positive for their property? Is there any research on that?
Well, I believe there is data out there regarding properties that front or are in very close proximity to trails. I don't know, how the trails location would affect the residents to the south. But I think there is data in there, and I think I'll research it and see what I can find and provide it to you. Mr. Maniaci, who is here from Mondrian, will remember when it went to Planning Commission, I felt it was important to have that public access and extend that trailway all the way to Livernois, because it provided value not only to this development, but also to residents of the city of Troy, including people who live in this neighborhood. So they'll be able to go out to Livernois, come up here, and instead of having to walk all the way up to the dog park to access that trailway, they'll be able to access it here. That is a benefit. That creates value for residents, including the people that are most closely related to it. And I mentioned at the meeting, and I expected a part of me. Don't hate me, Joe. A part of me thought that I'd be getting some pushback from Mondrian. I think he recognized the value of it, and he very willingly granted this easement to provide this benefit for residents. So I think he understands the importance of these connections.
Additional questions for city management? Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Erickson, go.
So you mentioned earlier that when you were talking about the master plan, that the standard is that the rezoning would not be in material conflict with the master plan. Do we have a little bit more guidance on what exactly that means?
Well, it's a subjective standard that is applied, by the individual members of this board. But when I look at that, in my mind, when I review this, it's somewhat closely compatible to R1E insofar as the front yard setback 25 feet is the same, the rear yard 35 feet is the same, the side yard setbacks from building to building are the same. So everything's the same. The height 30 feet is the same. The difference, and it's a big difference, is you're able to attach the units. So instead of having each individual unit separated by 5 feet on one side and 10 feet on the other, they're able to compress units together and join them like they do here with 5 units per building. That creates the massing that the neighbors are concerned about looking to the north. I get that, but it's also, if you can kind of plant that to the side and look at this, it's relatively small in scale. It does not have vehicular access to an abutting neighborhood, so it directly accesses Livernois Road. It's got sidewalks or trail on both sides. It's going to be consistent in terms of parking, like we talked about, with parking in the garage, parking on the driveway, parking in the street. It's not going to have a large guest parking lot. It's got amenities that are very close by, that are attractive to neighbors who are going to live here as well as residents. So in terms of character, it starts to tick a lot of boxes in terms of being single-family residential and character. Ticks a lot of boxes. So if you can buy into the massing of the building, and I understand that the massing is important and it's more impactful, but we're not talking about an ugly building here. We're talking about buildings that are built with quality materials, brick, hardy board, dimensional shingles and metal roofs. This is a quality development, really well designed. So I think it's a tricky site, because as you're driving south on Livernois, you start to see, the Walsh College and the church and the assisted living facility. The community center on the other side of the street, the apartment buildings. It takes on a bit of more of an institutional type character as you go south, and it transitions into Big Beaver, but there's still single-family residential that's close by. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and I talked earlier about balance. This seems to strike a balance here by being single-family residential in character. Again, the massing of the buildings is more, but the massing isn't out of place given the institutional character that's starting to develop along this portion of Livernois Road. Very long-winded answer to your question. I apologize.
No, it's actually quite helpful. Thank you. And then I believe in response to some questions that were submitted beforehand, you estimated, because this is not a cluster development, so we don't have the parallel plans, but you estimated that if this were not approved, the developer could still, by right, build between 15 and 30 units, depending our single-family homes,
Yeah.
depending on what type of, if they were just doing a traditional single-family versus a cluster development.
That was a best estimate.
Right.
Based on that, the lot width and the length of the road that was provided. So around 15 by right, but again, if they submitted a one-family cluster and they did those 1,900 square foot duplexes that we've talked about, it's conceivable that they could get approved for 30 in there. So it's roughly comparable in terms of number of units.
Would there be any significant change in how the city and other agencies would be looking at things such as stormwater runoff and so forth for a by right development versus this conditional rezoning?
Exact same process. Final site plan approval would be the exact same process. Because my assumption is there's the same amount of cutting and filling, et cetera. So exact same.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Brent? Councilmember Hamilton.
Do we have an estimate on how many new trees they're going to put in? Like, I didn't hear a number. I think, according to the agenda packet, they required something like 33-inch. But how many, do we have a number on how many they are? Maybe that's for the applicant.
I've got a fairly high degree of confidence that Mr. Epping can tell you how many trees are proposed for the site. I could look it up in the plans, but Mr. Epping is.
Can I put you on the spot, Brent?
Wouldn't be the first time, Mr. Mayor.
You've experienced the concerns in this community about development.
Mm-hmm.
You've been up here a lot of times, whether before Planning Commission, before us. My assumption, based on your answer you just gave to Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt about how it does conform to the master plan, or all of those reasons, to me that was one of the more, you called it, I think, wordier. I don't know what you said, but I think the fact that you were able to give such a long explanation and answer to it shows that you see the value, you see this project as one consistent with what this community is looking for when it comes to this type of development. Is that a fair assumption? I mean, I know you're in your role as planning director, and you've gone. The Planning Commission has recommended this. My assumption, and this is my question. My assumption is that you also personally know the history of this city, and based on everything you know and what you've experienced, this development is more in line with what is appropriate for the city. Is that fair to say?
I think that's well put. I think that's fair to say. I also think that the fact that the developer has voluntarily entered in a conditional rezoning agreement and got ahead of some of these potential issues. I believe they had a neighborhood meeting with residents, and they listened. And you'll recall, I know you all pay attention to Planning Commission agenda packets. There was a conditional rezoning proposed for this site some time ago that was, it kind of died it was the choice of the developer to not go forward with it, but it was 3-story townhomes. And, you saw the survey results, and you're paying attention to the meetings, and there's a lot of pushback against the 3-story townhomes. These are not 3-story townhomes. These are, again, more single family in character, and they're providing a housing type that we hear from a lot of people is needed in the community. So when you get back to that balance and you balance everything, and believe me, the potential impact on the neighbors is really important, and we put a lot of thought into that. We put a lot of thought into this development, and I think it ticks a lot of boxes, and I think they've done a really good job of trying to meet that balance.
Okay. Councilmember Hoderick?
I realize, looking back, we've long had conversations about this type of housing stock and our desire for developers to bring this to us specifically. And we've kind of sort of gotten it along the way with proposals, and I feel like this is the first time we're seeing precisely what we've talked about and wanted to evolve to for this type of proposal, finally. And now I'm wondering, it's taken a while to do that. Is it still a desire? I mean, you showed the survey, but you were hearing at the counter, I still get calls, but sometimes I feel like that's because the age I am on council and I have peers that are wanting to sell homes that maybe I have a skewed sense of what desires are. So I'm checking my assumptions, my personal anecdotal assumptions. Is this still a housing stock that we're looking for and wishing for and hoping that quality developers would bring to us in thoughtful ways?
I believe so based on the anecdotal information that I'm hearing. Now, there's a number of units that are in process and not developed yet. The market ultimately is going to make that determination. I mean, I hope that these are wildly successful because it's a copycat world. Ultimately, the market is going to make that determination. So hopefully, what we're hearing is, hopefully these types of projects are successful.
Thank you.
All right. My understanding is Mr. Epping, landscape architect, would like to address us as well.
Yes.
Now's the time for that.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Thank you for opportunity. We will try not to go very long, but we took some notes and we'll respond to some of your questions and thoughts. Appreciate that. Again, my name is Jim Epping. I'm with J. Epping Partners. We're land planners and landscape architects and have the pleasure to represent once again Joe Maniaci, Richard with Mondrian Properties, who obviously is familiar to the city of Troy. Mondrian has been working in the city of Troy now for 3 decades. Have created more than 40 neighborhoods within Troy and throughout Southeast Michigan. And in response to your master plan, really as a leading developer, leading home builder in the community, has actually shifted or added to, expanded their business model to create a subsidiary called Tableau of Mondrian. In Tableau, this is our first neighborhood. And really what Tableau is focused on are those smaller missing middle housing developments, specifically really because of the work in Troy and what your master plan is talked about. And so not only do we think it's appropriate, but we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is and really expanding the company to focus very specifically on this, primarily in the city of Troy. The last 7 developments that we have done in the city of Troy have either been cluster developments or smaller home developments like this. So we, like your residents, like your council, like your planning commission, believe very fully in creating that transitional housing for the missing middle, the aging in place. I, as a land planner, hold up Troy as really one of the premier communities in the state of Michigan that has had the forethought to think, boy, we're a really large, really healthy community, a community where people want to stay, but everyone's got a 4 or 5 bedroom home, and as that baby boomer generation gets closer to their late 60s, their 70s, they're moving out of those. And so there are studies, to your point, that start to say, are we going to have a glut of 4 and 5 bedroom homes because the younger generations either just don't have the density or the population or are looking for different opportunities. So the city of Troy to have taken such an aggressive action in your master plan to say, hey, give us more diverse housing. We think it's smart. We're seeing other communities follow suit, and certainly Mondrian is leading the way with the creation of Tableau and in neighborhoods like this. So why we think this is a perfect neighborhood is, A, we think it's consistent with the master plan. We know that it is going to provide 30. We wish it was more, but really with the city of Troy, what we've been successful in doing is putting 30 homes here and 12 homes there, but always gearing towards that missing middle. Certainly there's still opportunity to build big, beautiful homes, and we'll continue to do that, but to see these opportunities to transitional housing, and by transitional housing we mean it's placed in the community, it's next to residential, it's across the street from institutional, it's on a busy road, and so it's a transition from a zoning point of view that it allows almost an appropriate buffer between single family and maybe the university and so forth. What's great about it too is, and we really haven't talked about it, is we're preserving 55% open space. And so we're able to take this density, properly engineer the site, properly balance the site so that we can retain the water on site, create that pond, that wet detention, that beautiful pond, cascade the site into itself so that we can store it and then release it into the drain in a controlled, responsible way rather than just having it sheet drain, as we heard, and still create these 30 homes. In terms of architecture, Brent was really very nice in his review. We're proud of the architecture, and what's neat about it is architecture like this, what we're calling a modern Michigan farmhouse architecture. It's very, very beautiful, it's well built, but what's neat about it is it isn't just a monolithic building. If you look at it, it's frankly expensive to build because it has an awful lot of articulation. Each home, you can say, okay, that's my door, that's my garage, but more importantly, it has an awful lot of ins and outs, a lot of corners, a lot of gables, and what that we feel will do is be very, very much in scale or in character to the residential neighborhoods next door. So it's just entirely at the other end of the spectrum from a big square block building. You know, it has character on all four sides, and so we're confident that that will be you know, an appropriate neighbor, appropriate companion to the area. Public easements, yes, absolutely. We think it's important. Think of it almost as a safety path that will go right from Livernois through the site to transition right through the site and through the pass. We're already actively engaged in trying to facilitate the conversations with the neighbors to the north. As long as we can, you know, work with the city and get that, we can certainly take that trail to our property edge and then have it join up. You know, just like any type of neighborhood, the more we can have people go in circles, have different paths. You can imagine kids going through there, people pushing strollers, so it really becomes part of your trail system throughout the city. So we're proud to be a part of that. Stormwater, we talked about that. I've never been, I don't think, more involved with maybe 2 or 3 projects over the course of my career that have had this level of jurisdiction. Anywhere from your city, really talented consultant and experienced consultants, both in-house in the city of Troy as well as with OHM, the city, the county, the state, and then up to the federal government in FEMA, and then back down so that then ultimately the city has the final signing authority. So you'll be the first to review it. It'll go through all those various agencies. It'll come back down to you with their either feedback and our reactions to that feedback and response to it. But by the time it gets down here and ultimately the city is the one that issues the permits, it would certainly give me, if I was in the city's position, a great deal of confidence that not only have your experts looked at it twice, at least twice, but all the experts up and down the ladder have, and then it comes back down to you. So our job, our responsibility, and you've seen it in action with Mondrian over the last 30 years, is to do our part, to do the heavy lifting in terms of engineering, and to make sure that you know, we satisfy each of those agencies. Not only are we legally obligated to do that, but frankly, we're morally obligated to do that, and we have a business obligation to do that because we want to keep working in Troy. So we'll continue to absolutely be the benchmark in the city of Troy. 203 trees coming onto the site. What's neat about the trees, and again, I'm a landscape architect as well as a planner, we have the opportunity here, certainly with grading, we're going to take down about 50% of the trees, as you heard. What's nice about just the natural aspects of this site is the lane drain is the complete length of the southern boundary. We're going to be preserving about 25 feet of I call it brush, because it's not only those 7 or 8 trees at the end of the street and all the trees, but really what's important is that thicket, if you will, the understory, which really provides that density. We're then providing, as we talked about, a long string of trees closer to our residential buildings. Those are on centers of about 12 to 15 foot, and as we go back towards the greener part of the site, they're about 15 to 18 foot apart. Almost entirely evergreens, the new trees, so we'll have that brush of the existing brush and then the evergreens. We have provided some lower branching river birch, some crab trees. I like to use those because they branch lower rather than like a big maple that, you look right through it. So we think it's going to be a healthy landscape. I think we've got about 20 different varieties of trees so that we don't have another emerald ash borer type thing. So we've looked real carefully. I don't say this to the monitoring team too often, but it's an expensive landscape, right? We really have exceeded the landscape ordinance, but it's a benefit to the city, it's a benefit to our neighbors, but it's also a benefit to our future residents as well. And so we really are going for that park-like setting. We're happy to answer any questions. It's been a long presentation so far, and we appreciate that. But really, my message here is that we've listened to the Planning Commission. We've met with and listened to the residents. We know that it's change. We know that we'll do it in a very responsible way, in a really, frankly, very good-looking way. We think it's going to be a great addition to the community, to the city of Troy, and. We're here to make sure that we're good neighbors, and we'll continue to have a great project here. So appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. While you're up, any questions? Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question about the leasing community, because, there were some residents that expressed concerns, people, maybe it being a little transitional, people not owning their homes, and, it could create, a different kind of dynamic in the neighborhood. And so I was just interested to find out what exactly that would look like, the leasing community, and have you done this before? Are there any other communities you've done leasing?
I appreciate that question. What I failed to mention is we are marketing. It's not going to be registered as an age-restricted community, but we are very, very deliberately marketing to a 55 or 50 and older community. So we don't anticipate young families. We don't anticipate college kids. It really is intended to be, kind of the marketing is we are providing a neighborhood of peace and quiet, right? It's a very park-like setting, and so it'll be marketed strongly towards 50 and older, which really, in today's world, probably means 65 to 70 and older. Folks like my parents that may live in Florida for half the year, had previously lived in Troy, and now are looking for an opportunity like this. It's interesting too, there's an awful lot of articles about this rent for choice. As opposed to people who, used to, you only rented a house when you were right out of college and before you got married, and then you bought and owned a home. Now we're seeing people across all age groups really renting for choice, either because they want to buy something in Florida, or some people rent because they have a lot of toys and jet skis and things like that. So people are using their money differently, or maybe their jobs are changing. In terms of doing this before, Joe and Richard and the team certainly have different rental investment opportunities that are for lease. This is going to be our first community that's fully for lease. What's neat is we're building the units so that they can be sold. In other words, they'll all be separately addressed, they'll all be separately metered, they'll all be separate units, from a construction point of view. The intent is to lease them and to own it as a portfolio and to add more communities like this. But if the residents, we anticipate it not being a rapid turnover, but if people are there for 5 or 6 years, they may say, hey, boy, we really do want to buy. In all reality, we would probably make that decision and say, okay, let's look to sell all 30 of them. It would probably get confusing if we sold one and then one and then one. So for the foreseeable future, it would be a luxury lease, but it certainly could be, from a construction point of view, turned into for sale condos.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilmember Chamberlain-Crango.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Epic, just to confirm what you said, 25 feet of brush, is that the green area of the existing trees? So that would be 25 feet of those trees, and then the other additional trees you would add?
That's the approximate line. We would follow the easement of the drain, which has that offset. So part of that would be the actual drain, which has quite a bit of brush in it, and then the area of the drain easement going north into the site. So it does undulate a little bit based on the geometry of the drain, but it's roughly 25 foot.
In terms of height of the trees, do you have, and this is your expertise,
Yeah.
anything you can add to that in terms of the ones you're going to plant in, and then the ones that are existing in the green area that will stay? Kind of what height are we at vis-a-vis the 30 feet of height of the building?
The trees coming in all meet or exceed your ordinance. So our evergreen trees would be coming in at 8 foot. I think we specified some 10-foot trees in there too, because we like to have it, kind of a different look to it. And of course, these are all on the submission dockets within your packet. The deciduous trees, the trees that would be used for street trees and throughout the green area in the back, the single stem trees would be 3-inch caliper trees, which is a little larger than your ordinance calls for. And then the river birch would be a multi-stem tree that would come in at about 8 to 10 foot tall tree as well, and they all grow pretty quickly. In terms of the existing trees, it's important to note that the 807 trees and the 400 that are being removed, those are the regulated trees that were measured within your ordinance. So that means that those are 6-inch caliper or greater. There's an awful lot of smaller trees, 2-inch, 3-inch trees that are on site too, which will remain within those areas. And so those trees, are mature trees that you see out on the site now, probably range anywhere from 15 foot up to 35 foot.
Other questions? So this was a question raised in the Planning Commission meeting, and I just want to kind of push for an answer. So if this development was done today, you were taking these to market to rent, what would be an average price for one of the rentals?
I look at square footage. They're going to range in size from about 1,325 feet up to about 1,850 feet. Joe, do you have, at this point, we're 2 years out, and with the change in economy, do we know roughly?
Today, just guess if it was today. It's actually quite important to me. So.
No, I understand.
$1,300, maybe around $2,600 a month. So they're going to be high-end condos.
You repeat that, I couldn't hear.
So the smaller ones may range up to as much as $2,000 to $2,600 per month. In terms of amenities, these are going to be, as the car companies say, well-appointed homes, and so they'll have very market-driven rents.
Okay. Last question. Do you have some market research around seniors wanting to rent as opposed to moving into a smaller home that they downsize and they own? Because I haven't seen a lot of research, and none of the seniors I've talked to, they typically want to still own a home, so just wonder about your...
I've been collecting articles, and actually, if you'd like, I can forward those to Mr. Savadan tomorrow. We have a series of articles, because we're doing communities like this and other big similar type project up in Orion Township right now, and a lot of it has always been anecdotal evidence. And so we said, let's do a little research. And there's actually a number of articles out there that is doing this rental lifestyle or rent to live, a lot of people are calling it. So I'll forward that tomorrow.
Additional questions? I heard you're asking about the market rents, what it might look like in 2 years. Is that the expected? I know there's so many variables these days, but assuming permitting processes go as planned, do we expect completion in about 2 years? Is that the idea?
I would think so, yeah, because normally if we didn't have so many, if the drain wasn't there, we'd be going a lot quicker. But yeah, we just have an awful lot of engineering and a lot of checks between here and then. But certainly, we'd love to see construction start by next summer, and ideally see some buildings up by next year. But by the time it's completed, all 30 units or all 6 buildings would more than likely be in the next year.
Any other questions?
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
I'm going to open the public hearing. We do have 2 people who have signed up to speak from residents this evening. I'll give the opportunity for additionals after. As a reminder, public comment, you're given 3 minutes. When the clock turns yellow, you have 1 minute left, and when it turns red, your 3 minutes are up. So first up on the list this evening is Odetta Fakani, who I recognize from a previous meeting.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, City Council. I did address a lot of my concerns on unscheduled item on the agenda in the August meeting. I do have another concern that I didn't have time to address. Usually when they have such developments, either condos or rental apartments, which is what practically this is going to be. There is a security concern with the neighbors, and they have a wall around it. Because I'm a single mother, and security is a big issue for me. And if this is going to be rental properties, basically anybody can get in there, people that don't have pride of ownership. And I'm concerned that they're not going to be as responsible to their fellow neighbors and the environment as the other neighbors that actually own the homes around the neighborhood. So I didn't hear that this property was going to have walls around like many other similar properties of this nature have in Troy. Like basically everywhere I see, the condos are separated by private homes with walls. So that's one of my main additional concerns, other than the environmental, the flooding, the decreased adjacent home values, because as I quoted even last time in the Troy Master Plan of 2016, they do recognize it's Resolution 2016-0840, Chapter 7, that it says, the value of home sites adjacent to open space, parks, wetlands, green belts, and other green amenities is greater, all things being equal, to similar sites not adjacent to such amenities. So rezoning this property would make it not adjacent to green belts. And I know they said that they would elevate the ground for these condos, and the height of these condos is, as stated, 30 feet, but with the elevation of the ground, it might be way above 30 feet from the other houses on Lewis Avenue or Frankton or Troy. So I do have a concern about that as well. And there's also a mosquito problem, which in all of our houses south of Lane Drain, the pond is going to exacerbate that mosquito problem. We have a high population of bats because all that area is forested right now, and we know that bats control the mosquito population. If you cut down the trees and add a pond there, that mosquito problem is going to become much worse. So if this goes through, I would hope that they would be responsible for treating that pond as well.
Thank you, Ms. Fakani. Appreciate you coming forward again this evening.
Thanks.
Next up on the list is Dwayne Christophus. Is that right? All right.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Thank you for your service, first of all. A couple questions I guess I had regarding the cut and fill. I mean, do they legally have the right to cut that much and fill that much? Second would be the depth of the cutting. If they are cutting it that much, it looks like they're tripling the size of the buildable land from what it originally is now. If they cut it, is it going to be essentially wetlands now? Is it going to be as low as the wetlands that they're not touching? And then as far as accessibility for the community to use the trails, I believe everything to the north is wetlands, and you can't just pave that. That has to be a boardwalk, I believe. I'm not sure, but I believe it has to be a boardwalk and not paved, and cost is exorbitant. The other thing, as far as the community having access to it, I don't believe there is a pedestrian walkway over Lane Drain on the east side of Livernois. So nobody to the south is going to safely be able to get up to that without, what's the cost of a bridge, a walkway bridge there. Then also the lease is a concern, as far as I don't believe many empty nesters are going to want to lease. I think it's going to be, I know they say they'll market to it, but they're going to lease, they're going to want to fill them. So if they don't have empty nesters wanting to lease them, they're going to be leased to whoever's willing to lease. And then the pond, if it's going to be a wet pond, is it going to be filled? Because if it's not filled, then it'll eventually be dry, and if it is filled, are they going to fountain it to help with the mosquitoes? And I guess that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming forward this evening. That concludes those who have signed up to speak in this public hearing, but because it is a public hearing, you didn't need to sign up. So would anyone here this evening like to speak on this issue that hasn't already? All right, seeing no one. Just thinking. All right, someone like to move the resolution, need it on the table for discussion. Yes, City Clerk Dixon, you don't want to move the resolution, so what do you need?
No, I don't. You need to close the public hearing.
I need to close the public hearing? All right. Thank you. All right, public hearing is closed. Now would someone like to move the resolution? Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move E1, Conditional Rezoning, CRJPLN 2002-001, Proposed Homestead Condominiums east side of Livernois, north of Big Beaver, PIN number 88-20-22-001-007-008-009, Section 22 from R1E, One Family Residential District to RT One Family Attached Residential District, as printed in the agenda.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that we approve E1 Conditional Rezoning CRJPLN 2022-001, Proposed Homestead Condominiums, east side of Livernois, north of Big Beaver, PIN number 88-20-22-001-007-008-009, Section 22 from R1E, One Family Residential District, to RT, One Family Attached Residential District. Now it's time for discussion. Councilmember Hamilton.
I'd like to ask the applicant to address the concerns of the two residents. It spoke particularly the fountain fill, the cutting and filling, and how that would work. Is the pond going to be filled to make sure it doesn't go dry? And then just to speak on the point about the trail, we have every year we invest in our trail and pathway program. So I think if this project is completed, we would probably allocate 1 year's funds, part of 1 year's funds, to put in a boardwalk or whatever was needed to connect to it. I think the unique opportunity of this, at least where I'm concerned, I don't know where the rest of council is, it would be well worth the investment as we build our trail and pathway program. So I think the city would bridge that, or we would look to bridge that connection and add that to our normal budget that goes towards that. Now, can the applicant address those other concerns? The wall, mosquitoes, sure. And then
security.
Fountain. And security, you're right.
If you'd like to.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I took some notes. It is not our intention to put walls around the neighborhood. Number one, with the presumption that the walls would be on or about the property line, really what the beauty of the plan is that most of the perimeter of the property will have those existing trees and, of course, the lane drain. So in terms of pride of ownership and security, that is one of the benefits of this project, that the project will be owned and maintained by Mondrian Properties, or Tableau by Mondrian. And so that pride of ownership has been demonstrated kind of again and again and again with their previous projects. It's not the scale, and frankly, it just isn't an apartment complex. They really are condominiums that are for lease. If it was 150 or 200 apartments with big parking lots and blind spots and all those other things, there certainly are another host of issues and potential problems that we just don't expect to see here. This really is a very quiet, single-loaded neighborhood, cul-de-sac neighborhood that's going to look and feel and will be residential. And so we're going to be locally owned, locally managed. We'll have management team on it. And so we just don't anticipate any of those type of problems. And certainly if they occur, they'll be dealt with immediately. Bat houses, I should have mentioned that in some of our meetings with the neighbors, there's one gentleman that lives immediately south who really, frankly, knows an awful lot about the environment and about animals, and he's pointed out the mosquitoes and the wildlife. And so we've committed, it's part of our plans, to install bat houses throughout the development to try and encourage those bats to continue. We also are planting butterfly gardens with this idea to attract butterflies and natural birds and different things like that. We've labeled that back area as a park, and that might be a little bit of a misnomer. It's a green open space, but we are very deliberately planting it with what we'll call a prairie mix, a seed mix that's a prairie mix, and so that's intended to grow back up. Our goal for that center area is to allow it to be reforested in a pretty short order, and you'll see probably over the next 6 years that will begin to grow up, and over the next 10 to 12 years, that really will start to fill in very, very quickly with going back to kind of that Michigan wooded area. And so those trails will be maintained, they'll be mowed a few feet on either side to make sure that it's safe and easily accessed. But that center area, don't think of it, despite my labeling it as a park, think of it more as a natural open space where that wildlife will continue to live. But we certainly will include bat houses and different things like that. In terms of that pond, our engineers, PEA, right here in the city of Troy, know those soils. They've begun to engineer it and will construct it in such a way that it will maintain and be wet. I don't think that we've gone as far as to talk about a fountain, but in all likelihood, there would likely be a fountain. I'll have to check with Joe and the team on that, but it makes sense, right, to aerate it. It also is just an aesthetic feature, and since it's really kind of in the backyard of our homes, it's to our benefit to make sure that that continues to be a beautiful park-like setting. Mr. Mayor, did I miss any of those questions, or were there some additional?
One other thing I didn't mention was also the bridge across the lane drain so that the residents in the southern neighborhood could access. Because if you looked at the documentation, it looked like there was a sidewalk going over it.
I honestly, in my mind, there is a sidewalk going out over there, but I don't live that close, so I'll take the residents. Yeah, we're showing a sidewalk there. I'll have to, I mean, perhaps someone in the community here would know better than I. But yes, I mean, the good part about this is it does become part of your safety path trail system. And so, as you pointed out, there's, no doubt funding and a master plan for the trail system. And so whether it's the connection to the north up to the dog park and to the Troy trail system, or if it's that connection, getting down to Big Beaver, we think it's great, now with the restaurants and Cooper's Hawk and everything else, these are all very, very walkable neighborhoods. And so as much pedestrian biking activity as we can help generate, we think that's a good thing.
Additional comments?
Yeah, I guess I'll make my comments on the project. I mean, these are always the hardest decisions when they come. I know how much they affect my neighbors. I think quite a few council members here have had some of these near their properties for sure. This one, I've listened to all the residents' concerns. Comes to water is the one in particular. Got a lot of response on that. I'm confident that this project will not negatively impact the water situation. It may even improve it. I would like the city to, I'm sure we're already trying to work with the county on the lane drain and getting it cleared out, but if we can further those discussions as we go into our advance. I know residents throughout the city have drainage issues. If we can add that as a priority or as something we put more investment into to get those cleared out, I would definitely support that. When it comes to traffic concerns, I know there's no guarantee this will be an older clientele, but if it is, they take less car trips, younger folks with kids and everything. So I don't think this will add much traffic. As they said, it may be 200 more trips per day on a street that has 20,000 trips per day. So that's only 1% increase. Woodland, they're preserving half the trees and then putting in brand new trees to replace half the ones they took out. To me, that's an improvement. And I know there were, one thing that hasn't been mentioned was concerns with the schools. Could the schools accommodate it? I know my daughter just started at the preschools in the Troy School District, and so I've been talking with them, and their enrollment in the last 2-3 years has actually gone down by like 500 students. I'm not sure why. Is it COVID? Is it people moving away? But they want more students. So I'm not, all the concerns that residents brought up, very legit. I take them very seriously, but I honestly think this project covers all of them. It'll increase the property values for the city as a whole because this project will bring in revenue compared to what it is now. And then it provides a very nice amenity with a trail and pathway system, with a woodland or open space being added to that, and we can connect it to our trail and pathway system, which I'm confident that we will. I have to support this. I think it's the best option. If we vote no, I don't see how the site's still going to get developed, and we won't even have a say in that. By right, they'll be able to put in probably 15 plus homes, and I think this is the better option. I have to support this.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig.
Thank you, Mayor. So as I share some of my deliberations, I want to be honest that I'm still working through my decision. So I just want to focus my comments around the things that I really like about the project that really stand out, as well as some of the things that I'm just struggling with, to be honest. And, you know, welcome to hear what my colleagues have to say and your thoughts on those, as we just heard from Council Member Hamilton. So to start with kind of design and screening and buffering, first of all, this project in this location, this is not just any location in our city. This is just across from our community center. It is essentially in the heart of our city. It is across from our Civic Center campus. And so that's why this is supremely important to me. I know many of us, we are here on the Civic Center campus multiple times during the week, as many of our residents are, using those assets. And being just across from the community center, that is ideal for seniors or any folks who want to just come across and you want to swim in the pool or use the fitness center, take a yoga class. Lots of great senior programming at the community center. So again, like what that looks like, that project, its look and feel and kind of all of that, the screening around it, it's really important to me. So my questions, I did have some concerns around kind of the screening and buffering, especially on the southern property line. It was raised by residents both on Lewis and Troy, as well as the area around kind of the trails, if there might be noise. But I feel from what I saw, there is a strong attempt to really have as good as possible kind of buffering by keeping in some of the existing trees, adding some others. Some of the trees you said are 35 feet that will be left, and the length is 30 feet. So I do feel a little more assured around that, and I do think there are some great design elements, so I do want to recognize that. When it comes to the second element, the missing middle, so we need this housing. We definitely need it in Troy, and we need housing for our seniors. The thing I am wrestling with is around the price point, and around the reality is, are seniors looking to rent at this point in their life? I didn't do massive research, but I just pulled a stat that was surveying those between the ages of 55, 75, not in Troy, and just said that of those, only 5% said they planned to rent, while 31% were undecided. It's a big number. 64% planned to buy. So I think when I talk to the seniors in my neighborhood, when they think about downsizing, I think most think about moving to a smaller home that they would own. And so I haven't had a lot of those conversations, and that's why I would love to hear from my colleagues the conversations you have had. There is probably one person I can think of that I did speak to once, a Troy resident looking to move into potentially, who's a senior, into a rental opportunity. So I just think it's a missed opportunity if these truly are not targeted towards seniors. I'm afraid they won't be. I think they'll be young professionals, young families before they have kids. And so just given its location and opportunity, I really would love for them to be for seniors. Otherwise, there are options around the R1E or cluster options where maybe you could have something that would be homes that seniors would move into. The last thing I'm going to focus on is what I love. So I think what actually does really win me over with this project is the parks and trails. And my understanding when I asked the question was the part of the trail that goes through kind of the wooded and the wetlands there, it connects to the Troy trails, the applicant would be paying for that. So whether it's a boardwalk or whatnot, but maybe I misunderstood that. But I think the fact that you've pursued a public easement, an easement since the Planning Commission meeting, I really appreciate that. That was something I think that I was looking for, and there wasn't that easement. I was gonna have questions about that, because one thing I've wanted to see our applicants take on the recommendation of the Green Space Subcommittee, which really was asking for more private developers to look into adding pocket parks into their developments that would be open to the public. And the fact that you've done that, and with the easement, you secured that, that is really attractive. And I do love that idea and the amenities that you have within there. So that is something that does have me, won over on that. I am still working through some of the other things, but I look forward to hearing from my colleagues as I work through my answer.
Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain Craig, for your.
Mr. Mayor, just one point of clarification, I know.
I don't know. I actually don't know. We don't typically do. We don't typically at this point, but it's not really part of our back and forth. I appreciate it, and
I was going to clarification on argument or anything.
okay. I can't really. It's just not the way it's set up. So thank you. Okay. Additional, Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I spent a lot of time on this weekend, and I was really struggling with it because I really heard what the residents were saying, especially about the loss of green space and the concerns about stormwater runoff and exacerbation of existing flooding. I think it's pretty clear that the existing flooding that occurs is in large part, well, part of it is Troy's just a naturally swampy area. It just happens. And then on top of that, we have a drain that is sort of doing its job, but maybe could be a little bit better. And that's not really something that this applicant or the city controls. That's really a countywide issue. It's something beyond our control, and it's not part of what we're here to decide. I was reassured by some of the answers I received today about the level of scrutiny that this project has gone through and will go through in the future to ensure that there is not that adverse impact on adjoining properties. I'm hopeful that as applicant is that in fact what they're planning to do with the cut and fill and lowering, and I don't know if you mentioned this today or if I saw it in the Planning Commission notes or meetings, that the open space area is actually going to be lower. And the idea is that even if the retention pond isn't enough, if the drain's not enough, then the water would be collecting in that open space. So where you would have natural grasses and so forth that would absorb the water. So I feel a little bit more comfortable with the notion that whatever flooding that the neighboring homeowners are experiencing, it should not get worse with this, and the city will be looking at that very closely to make sure that it does not get worse, because that's part of what's being agreed to here. As far as the loss of trees or green space, we're not being asked today to decide, will this property be developed, will it not be developed? What we're being asked to decide is, can this applicant develop it in this particular way versus doing what they could do without our permission or even oversight, which is put in traditional single-family housing, a dozen or more units. We wouldn't be able to get the promise of all of this wonderful site plan, which in my opinion is a very beautiful site plan. We wouldn't have that assurance of what's going to happen here. They would just more or less be able to do whatever they can do within the zoning regulations and so forth. Here we have, as Mr. Savanant mentioned, this conditional rezoning provides some measure of predictability and as to what's going to happen. And I think that's ultimately when you're faced with a situation where you have property, it's going to be developed regardless. It's better to have some predictability and some say in what happens versus, just no holds barred. I love the notion that this is addressing that missing middle housing. I think that is a seriously lacking in our community. We have plenty of single-family, traditional single-family residential housing. We have too many townhouses, at least that's what our residents are saying, and I don't disagree with them on that. What we're missing is that missing middle, and I share Councilmember Chamberlain-Karanga's concern about the price point. It's not particularly affordable for some seniors, maybe for others more so. But I can vouch for the fact that my 92-year-old mother loves renting. She loves not being a homeowner. So I think maybe it's a question of the age group, maybe, a 60-something senior isn't as interested in renting, but an 80 or 90-something senior would love to not have to deal with it, So that's, I think, definitely an amenity that, and there's just a lot of wonderful amenities. I really do think it's a beautiful plan. I'm trusting that the stormwater and flooding will not get worse, might even actually improve. We're not counting on that, but at least it's not going to get worse. So I feel like overall this is what we want. This is what we want to see, and I like the fact that it's the green space. It appears like an open space, but we're going to allow it to fill in and have more of a forest-like setting. So I'm feeling a lot better about this than I was when I was watching the Planning Commission video this weekend. So thank you for all the feedback and answering our multitude of questions, because it's really made a difference for me.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt. Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. So I agree with a lot of the things that my colleagues have said. I guess a few things that I do like, obviously I like that this does address the housing stock that we are looking for in the city. It does address, aging in place, the messy middle. It's something that we have been asking for. It's something that we have been looking for. So I do appreciate that. I also really like the trails and how hopefully it will connect to the dog park and just continue with our parks and Trailway, and I know that's something that our residents really, really, really do appreciate, in our city. And so when we are asked to look at these things, we're asked to consider 6 different factors. Sorry. And so the first, is that is it compatible with the surrounding households or the surrounding area? And I would argue that it is. Because it is, we do have single-family homes to the south and to the east, but it's off of a larger road, and there are a lot of different types of facilities in the area. So I would definitely argue that it is consistent and compatible with the surrounding area. And that kind of goes to A and B. And then C, I'm not as concerned about the traffic because it is off of a major road, Livernois, and, I think that I don't anticipate that it will generate, a lot of traffic or traffic that would be, prohibitive. D is that, are there sufficient public utilities and services? And yes, there are sufficient public utilities and services to support this facility. Obviously, it's a great location. It is surrounded by a lot of different things. I think that the individuals who lease the properties would really enjoy. Obviously, it is at the heart of our city. It's walkable to a lot of different areas, restaurants and other kinds of facilities. So I think that that's great. E, there is a demand. As we stated, there's a demand for the aging in place. So I believe that there is a demand for this type of property in our city. And then the last was that, does it unreasonably impact the adjacent properties? That was the part that I struggled with a little bit the most, because of the flooding issue. That was my biggest concern, was the flooding issue, and how is this going to be addressed appropriately for these neighbors? Because obviously flooding is already an issue, and I don't want to exacerbate that. It does sound, from listening to your presentation, listening to, our engineers, that there's a lot of checks and balances, and that there's a whole process that has to be addressed before the project goes through, that will not hopefully allow the situation to make a more negative impact on the neighbors. And so I have to trust that the process will be appropriate and will address, the neighbors' concerns, and will not make the flooding situation any worse. And so because of those reasons, I do feel that it does, address all the concerns in an appropriate way. So I probably will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. What council has in front of us is a binary decision. And the two choices are approval of the conditional rezoning with the site plan that has been a condition of that rezone, or we let the zoning remain as R1E, for which the developer can develop by right, and the project would never come to this council because it is within rights. I think there's a lot of residents that would want to have a third option, which is just don't do anything with the property, let it remain as it is. But that's not an option that this council can consider. Property owners have rights, and we have to be respectful of that. Similarly, we cannot compel a property owner to develop a property in a very specific way. It has to fit within the parameters of the ordinances and the laws. So the question before council is what could be developed by right, preferable to the proposal under this conditional rezone. The concerns that had been raised by residents related to stormwater retention, drainage, was very much my biggest concern. And so I really appreciate Mr. Finley giving us quite an education on stormwater retention and drainage. It was pivotal in terms of helping me come to conclusions. The concerns raised would be ones whether the property was developed R1E or with this conditional rezone. So now it's what plan to me benefits the community more. To me, the plan as proposed is a better benefit to the community with those accessible trails, whether or not connects to a larger trail system, which I hope it does. That's certainly a priority with this council, is a benefit that can be enjoyed very broadly by this community. The dialogue around the missing middle and maybe who the target customer might be for leasing the property, I think there's a lot of professionals that are not necessarily 50 or above that would be very interested in this type of luxury lifestyle, this quieter street than maybe imagined right now. And I say this in the view of there's a lot of people that are working from home still, and that may be the new normal, even once we're out of this endemic that we're in. And that scarcity of this missing middle housing isn't just something that Troy is grappling with, it's Southeast Michigan. And so we know that there's a demand that hasn't been fulfilled, and I think people will come. and not just necessarily retirees or those heading into retirement. This project reminds me of a development at John R. and Waddles. Not exactly the same, but it is a condo development that is, I'll say, shrouded with berms, with tall trees. Well, development's 20 years old, so the trees have all gotten bigger, but you almost don't know it's there. The thoughtfulness of the landscaping design I can appreciate because it gives that feel of being near everything, but being also shielded from everything. And I think that's something both residents within that community and surrounding neighborhoods will benefit from. I make the next statement knowing that in the past 2 years, one just a few months ago, I've had to grapple with, it was cluster developments, 2 of them near my own neighborhood, so I understand very well the concerns about losing green space. For me, it was green space that had been there for as long as I've been in Troy, which is 46 years. And so I can appreciate residents not wanting things to change. But I'll go back to what I said initially. We can't deny property owners the right to develop and improve their property, just as we can't tell residents what to do to improve or not improve their property if it falls within ordinances. And so if this property is going to be developed, which it is, my preference is under the plan submitted under the conditional rezone.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Councilmember Hoderick?
It's an interesting conditional rezoning when the council is taking longer with its comments than the residents that come to give us input. And I think I really respect my colleagues and the thoughtfulness they've put into this and the amount of time they're spending thinking out loud here with not only one another, but with the residents that we represent. And that's what we're here tonight to do. Our lane is to represent the residents. Our city administration and planning department has a role. The applicants, developers that come to the city with ideas and business plans for how they want to proceed, they have a role. Our role is to do the best we can within the zoning, within the laws, to represent our residents. And I think you can hear that we really strive. We are listening. We've had the emails. We've watched the Planning Commission meeting. We are hearing from our neighbors and listening to our neighbors as we contemplate this. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that we're witnessing here. And I want to thank my colleagues for that. I also want to acknowledge that, rezoning has a connotation, I think, to residents and can mean, boy, this is a big change than anything that what we would expect when we were living here. And I get that. And so we don't take a decision like this that comes before us lightly. But conditional rezoning, when I dove into this particular proposal coming, the conditions are offered by the applicant. I mean, this checks so many boxes of what we would love to see our developers offering when they come with a conditional rezoning. You saw us sweating that buffer between the neighborhoods. We're looking at those trees and contemplating that because we know that matters to our residents. We know it matters what it looks like from the main road. Clearly, this developer has also had a lot of experience with the city and heard that and really baked that in there. And I was triple checking that, am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing? Did they really offer this? Am I missing something? And I'm not. And you heard several of us do that. That matters to us, what those neighborhoods see. From the safety and security standpoint, this neighbor is a luxury leasing entity. These aren't 100 apartments being squeezed in there. The owner of this property wants to be a good neighbor, to be successful from the business side of this. And that's somewhat qualitative, but we have experience with this particular developer and property owner throughout the city. We know what kind of a neighbor that is. And that's a safety and security check mark for me as well. Actually isn't how I make the decision who the developers are, but it's the quality of the development that I'm looking at, the type of materials that are being proposed. When you hear luxury leasing, that's what we're looking at here. And if I lived in that neighborhood, if this was coming in next to me, it's that kind of quality that I would want to see coming next to my house. I repeat, it just checks so many of the boxes that we often dream of and hope for as projects come forward. The transition both from the north side to the south, there's been creativity there that it will tuck in there. It fits. It does not feel like, sometimes it feels like a shoehorn project that's going in. This feels like it fits here. It's change. Change is so difficult for all of us. It's so difficult for residents when it's right next door to them. I understand that. But this is going to be developed. Something is going to go here. And in my mind, this is what I would like to see fit there at this particular part of our community and for the neighbors that live adjacent to it. And for that reason, I will be supporting it.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. I don't know that this is what you wanted to clarify, but I don't think the petitioner or the applicant is committed to building a boardwalk in that space, in that easement that leaves the other side. I don't want that to go into our decision-making. That's probably an expense that would not be anticipated. But I had a feeling that might be what it was. But to Councilmember Hamilton's point, should the need come up to where that needs to be addressed as part of our trails, I'm sure we could work something out, or no commitments, obviously, but I think that was the clarification, and I just want to make sure that's clear, that a boardwalk is expensive, and that's not what's necessarily anticipated for approval. There's a lot, everyone has said pieces of things that have gone through my mind. I'm a little bit taken aback by a 2-hour public hearing where we've only had 2 residents speak. Usually if we have this length of a public hearing, it's because we've got 30 residents who have come to the podium. I think that goes to the breadth of the questions we've asked and the conversation we've had with our city staff, with the applicant, and I ultimately believe that's a good thing. And so I'm pleased with that, this discussion on that. I'll lead with this. I am supportive of this project. I will be voting for it. I do want to say a couple things, though, just to add to it and to talk about a couple things. When I first started getting emails about this project proposal, I really didn't know anything about it. It was before planning. It was kind of new to us. I looked at it in our portal, and I thought, wow, this looks like exactly what we've been asking for a long time. And so I was a little taken aback by the public opposition initially, because it seemed really consistent with what for the past 7 years we've heard about, and we've talked about the missing middle when we've asked for, first floor masters, smaller units. Several times I've asked Mr. Maniaci, why aren't you building smaller units with first floor masters? And he's always said it's market driven. I offer them, but people buy the 2-story colonials. I'm very excited for this Tableau project aspect, because I think he knows that it's something that in Troy we have been looking for. And I do think, even as time has gone by, that research from even 5-6 years ago, asking for missing middle housing, it's still there. As for the renting versus buying, I think that there's going to be people who are going to say both. The age may make a difference. I do think attitudes are shifting a little bit on, I think there used to be more of a stigma associated with renting. I think that's gone away. I don't know what interest rates will do on it. I think there's a lot of factors that are kind of beyond the scope of what we need to really focus on. But I can think of Don Edmonds, who used to be on our planning commission, and talking about different development projects. He never balked at the idea of leasing a unit somewhere in some luxury place here in the city of Troy. So it's anecdotal in one person, but I do think it's there are people who would love to lease and there are people who would only buy. So, you know, I think that you're going to find that no matter what. As supportive as I am of this project, I think we maybe have overstated a little bit the public park aspect of it, which I hate to say. Most people can't access that park unless they're on foot. There's no parking for it. They're not gonna, I mean, I suppose if there was a trail that connected behind Anthology and then they could park at the dog park and walk through, but I don't think they would. I think the residents who live to the south really don't have access to it, which is, well, they have access, but it's difficult access. We don't want them hopping across drains and doing things like that. And there isn't a sidewalk on Livernois there now. I don't know how that would play out. Don't love the idea of them going into the street to get around and over. So I do think we've overstated a little bit how exciting that park aspect is. I think it's great for the people who are going to live there, and I think it's great for somebody maybe who lives maybe at Amber Apartments across the street. They can walk across over, but you know, Huber Park's back there too. So I'm excited by it. I think it's a great amenity. I don't want anyone to think that residents from all over the city are going to get to enjoy this park. I don't know why I've chosen to point that out. It sounds a little negative for me, but it's just a reality, and it kind of concerned me a little bit because I do think the residents who live to the south, I think they'll be ultimately grateful to have that amenity there for those residents because there's not housing there, and it's still going to stay wooded in a certain sense, but it's not an easy access for them to use. That said, if we can connect the trail system to there, somebody coming from another part of the trail may make a loop through there and back around, and so it could get used that way. I hope that we're reaching out to Anthology again or soon to talk about that easement. I think that that would be a nice addition for sure. I wanted to address just briefly the security aspect of it and walls. I think you would hate it if there were ugly walls built around that property in the woods there. The security aspect is extremely important to me. I have young kids myself, but from a aesthetic and from where you want to live, I think going from woods to a wall would really be hard for anyone in those neighborhoods to take. And I am satisfied that the idea, that price point especially, or whatever that price point ends up being, it's not a place where there will be necessarily a lot of transient type residents or a high increase or an increase of security issues. Obviously, I have great faith in our police department, and I have great faith that it doesn't do the applicant any good to have a cesspool of crime and unsafe people living in their neighborhood, especially if they maintain ownership. Those are all my strangely negative sounding things. I know that Mondrian builds quality residential housing. You see it throughout our city. And like I said, the concept here is something that we've been asking for, and finally I think we've got one that is going to make sense. There's a lot of townhomes and apartment type living that are being built in this city right now or have recently been built that are nowhere near the quality of what Mondrian builds. And so I'm very comforted by that and very thankful that knowing the materials that will be used, it's a quality development and will definitely be attractive to many people. Ultimately, to me, it comes down to whether the certain aspects of the conditional rezoning are satisfied, whether it's consistent with the master plan. I do think they are satisfied. I do think it's consistent with the master plan, both the 2016 version and what we're proposing, some of the changes we're looking at now. Right. Obviously, compatibility with neighboring properties doesn't mean it has to be the same. It just has to be compatible. And I do think from a transitional standpoint and from what is around the surrounding area, it is compatible. Finally, the water issues, we've talked a lot about them. It's so important to the neighbors, it's so important to the city as a whole. I know there's a lot of checks and balances still to be looked at, or a lot of issues, or a lot of checkpoints as it relates to that. And I do have to have faith in city staff and the other agencies, and I do, of course, that all of those will be addressed prior to final approval. So based on all those reasons, and with a deep, deep concern for the residents' concerns and understanding that that neighborhood on those streets is very unique, and it's age and where it is and what's always been in that property, I will be supporting the project and hope that we can turn some of the neighbors' attitudes around and they'll end up enjoying it themselves. So with that, I will call for the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries. With that, I'm going to take a 5-minute recess, and we'll be back at 10 o'clock. All right, we'll go back on the record. Next up on the agenda is public comment for items on the agenda from Troy residents and businesses. There was one person signed up, but I think she was signed up for the public hearing as well, so we'll move on. As a result, there's no need for response from council or reply. There are no postponed items this evening, so we move on to regular business. First up are I-1 board and committee appointments. There's mayoral appointments this evening. I'd like to move the appointment of Jim Schmitz to the Local Development Finance Authority, LDFA, for the term expiring June 30th, 2024.
Support.
Moved by the chair, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve the appointment of Jim Schmitz to the Local Development Finance Authority for the term expiring June 30th, 2024. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes, motion carries. Next up, I'd like to move the appointment of Gina Setnar to the Volunteer Firefighter Incentive Plan Board as the citizen mayor-appointed position for the term expiring April 30th, 2025.
Support.
Moved by the chair, supported by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, that we approve the appointment of Gina Setnar as the citizen mayor-appointed citizen to the Volunteer Firefighter Incentive Plan Board for the term expiring April 30th, 2025. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Motion carries, and I thank both Jim and Gina for their willingness to serve. That concludes mayoral appointments this evening. I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt for city council appointments.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the appointment of Shama Kenkre to the Traffic Committee for the term expiring January 31st, 2025.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that we approve the appointment of Shama Kenkre to the Traffic Committee for the term expiring January 31st, 2025. Any discussion? Vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Motion carries. We thank Ms. Kenkre as well. That concludes city council appointments this evening. We move on to I-2, board and committee nominations. I have no mayoral nominations this evening. I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt for city council nominations.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the nomination or renomination of Pamela Brady to the Parks and Recreation Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2025.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, supported by Councilmember Chamberlain Craig, that we approve the nomination of Pamela Brady to the to the Parks and Recreation Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2025. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Motion carries.
I'd also like to move the nomination of Vinod Mudaliar to the Parks and Recreation Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2025.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, supported by Councilmember Abraham, that we approve the nomination of Vinod Mudaliar to the Parks and Recreation Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2025. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Motion carries. That concludes city council nominations this evening. There's no closed session requested, so we'll move on to I-4, Budget Amendment and Standard Purchasing Resolution 4, Oakland County Purchasing Cooperative, Troy Public Library Loading Dock Reconstruction, and I see Philip Quick is here, the Assistant Library Director, to introduce the item.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for entertaining this issue tonight. I'm standing here in the stead of Dennis Trantham, the Facilities Manager. Last year, Facilities brought to the attention of the library the condition of the loading dock at the library. The loading dock was constructed in 1984 when the addition to the library was built. It gets daily use, both from deliveries and from volunteers and staff who work on the loading dock to move materials in and out of the building. After 4 decades, the The loading dock has been repaired several times. It needs to be completely rebuilt at this point. This project was funded in the fiscal year 23 library capital budget for $25,000. When we put the project out to check on prices, the low price came in at $43,900. It was a suburban or a Oakland County cooperative price. So in order to proceed with this, we are requesting a budget amendment in the amount of $23,000 to complete this project this year.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions? I'd like to move the resolution. Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move I-4 Budget Amendment and Standard Purchasing Resolution 4, Oakland County Purchasing Cooperative, Troy Public Library Loading Dock Reconstruction as printed in the agenda.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve I-4 Budget Amendment and Standard Purchasing Resolution 4, Oakland County Purchasing Cooperative, Troy Public Library Loading Dock Reconstruction as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Motion carries. That concludes regular business this evening. Next up is the consent agenda. Would anyone on council like to pull an item from the consent agenda for discussion and further consideration? Councilmember Abraham.
I'd like to move all items on the consent agenda as printed.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Abraham, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve all items on the consent agenda as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries. If you're here on a consent agenda item this evening, all items have been approved. There are no memorandums and future council agenda items to announce this evening. I don't see that anybody has signed up for public comment for items not on the agenda from Troy residents and businesses, so there's no need for council or administration reply. We have no council referrals this evening, so next up are reports. Anyone on council have any comments related to the reports this evening? Councilmember Hamilton.
I wanted to point attention to O2A about the update on the Troy Public Library Youth Area renovation. It's unfortunate that we won't be able to complete this year. It was our plan. But putting the project out to bid in this inflation area, we couldn't find it. And this just really makes me think about the long-term future of the library and the fact that I just want to bring up the point to the council table as we talk about having our city advance to do long-term planning to the city, that maybe we need to consider, is it time to build a new library? See, ultimately any big decision like that would be up to the people of Troy, but I would like to see that considered as an option, what that would cost, how Troy residents feel about that. Is that what they want? Because we keep kicking this can down the road. The building's 50 years old, half 50 years old, half 35 years old, 37 years old. And we just keep putting so many maintenance dollars in. We had to up the library millage for those maintenance costs. At this point, are we just throwing good money after bad, and maybe it's time to finally look if maybe that's what we need to do. So that's my thoughts on this. I'd like to add it as a discussion, as something us and the residents of Troy can ponder over and consider.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. Additional comments on the reports? I'll just add to, I was hurt when I read this report. I can't think of the right word, but it was disappointing, as I'm sure it is to our library director and assistant director sitting right there. The report states that it'll be looked at further, and it'll continue to be looked at, and whether that rises to the level of what Councilmember Hamilton is pondering, I'm not sure yet, but I'm sure city management will look at options and potentially bring them to us as they see fit. It's disappointing. What can I say? But appreciate that it was discovered at this point of the game and we didn't get started on something that we couldn't finish. So I appreciate the hard work of staff on making those tough calls and putting that together. So that concludes comments on the reports this evening. Next up are council comments, because we don't talk enough up here. Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief because it's late. But I just want to show some attention for the Nature Uncorked that will be on Friday, November 4th from 6 to 9 at the Community Center. It's an excellent fundraiser, the largest fundraiser of the year for the Nature Center. So tickets are on sale. You can visit the website, and it is a wonderful event. I will probably bring it up again at another meeting in October, but just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sure you'll also mention this, Mayor. It relates to International Day. And Mayor, apologies for missing you. I was still at church and then at a block party. I think we were all running around over the weekend. But it's always a highlight of Troy Days is when Global Troy Advisory Committee, that is the city's advisory committee, essentially around diversity, equity, inclusion. Every year they host this beautiful International Day. And I just would be remiss if I did not give a big shout out to Lisa Bika-Grodsky, who single-handedly, and she has done this year in and year out, has done all of the programming, also programming for other nights as well, as a part of Troy Days in the entertainment tent. But she put that beautiful, lovely day together. And again, all of those who were able to turn out from Global Troy to support that event, it's just beautiful to see. And so it's something that really makes our city shine. And it was very appropriate because something that I failed to mention last week was we celebrated Welcoming Week last week, which runs September 9th to 18th. I believe we're still members of Welcoming America, which is a resource center helping us to be able to better support our immigrant populations and our diverse, wonderful heritages in our city. And I just wanted to read briefly, and it was late, the 2022 theme for Welcoming Week, which just ended yesterday which was, again, fitting, it was International Day. The theme was Where We Belong. I'll just read it quickly. By focusing on the places and spaces that foster belonging, our cities, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, Where We Belong aims to go deeper and spark individual reflection on how and why belonging occurs, in ways we can break barriers so that places can foster belonging for all, including immigrants and refugees. Cities, towns, counties, and nations, and the institutions within them can lean into what makes their communities welcoming places and showcase how it helps foster belonging for all people, including immigrants. By doing this, we demonstrate the scale and breadth of Welcoming Week spreading across the globe, leaning into the values of welcoming places and individuals by helping others belong and feel at home. So just wanted to share those words. Also, we just began celebrating also Hispanic Heritage Month that runs into next month as well. So again, just thank you to Global Troy for raising this awareness in the way that they do every year.
Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig. I appreciate that. Additional council comments? Just briefly, truly briefly. I imagine the Troy Community Foundation will be coming and give us a presentation about Troy Family Days at some point in the future, so I'll save my comments about them for when they're here. But I do want to thank city staff, police and fire departments, DPW for being much bigger partners in Troy Family Days than some people may realize. When the city gave it up several years ago, it had, for a number of reasons it did. As it's built back up over the years, the city staff has really played a much larger role than I think people realize, like I said. And for example, I was there 3 times yesterday for International Days, for the 5K in the morning. And then later with my family, I got to go home and change and do stuff. Every time I saw Kurt, he was right where he was. He was in the same clothes, and he'd been there since it was pouring rain in the morning until it was 85 degrees and humid in the afternoon and evening. So I know that city staff, just one example, Kurt spent a lot of hours there. I know that police and fire are always very, very tuned into what's going on as thousands of people are coming into our Civic Center property and they had an obligation to keep us all safe. And to the best of my knowledge, I think it was a very safe event, safe weekend, and we appreciate all the hard work of city staff and just everything that's gone into it from this side of it. But we'll talk more about Troy Family Days when the foundation's here to give their recap. But again, I just wanted to thank city staff first off. So you covered everything well with International Days. Thank you for that. I will say, yes, Lisa works very hard to book all of those performances, and they were really amazing, and very thankful that she takes that on so willingly. So thank you for calling her out, Rebecca. Okay. We have no closed session this evening, so with that, we're adjourned.